While Novak Djokovic remains in a hotel used to detain refugees and asylum seekers, Australia's Home Affairs Minister says the tennis world number one is not being held captive in Australia and is free to leave the country at any time. The cancellation of Djokovic's visa and his detainment have led to his supporters protesting outside the hotel, with some saying he should be moved from a so-called detention centre to a private house. Hundreds of Serbians, meanwhile, also gathered in Djokovic's native Belgrade yesterday outside the Parliament building. His own father was there, addressing the crowd with a megaphone and describing his son's situation as a major diplomatic and sporting scandal. With more on this ongoing saga is assistant sports editor Rohit Brijnath. Rohit, of course, one option for Djokovic is to leave Australia, but for now it looks like he feels strongly enough about his right to be in the country and play at the Australian Open, so much so that it's likely that he'll stay until Monday to keep fighting this issue with his visa. But how would all of this affect him physically and psychologically ahead of the Grand Slam if he is allowed to compete in the end?
So you'd say, I think for most normal people, Novak Djokovic is not your ordinary tennis player. I think for most normal people would be distracted. Obviously, you're not playing for many days. You're tense, and tension is always exhausting. So obviously, that's not good for him. But I think the thing with Djokovic is that he often thinks the story of tennis is him against the world, and I think that fuels him. And I think, he just has a lot of chips on one shoulder. And I think that pushes him. And I think that, this will sort of, in a way, increase his resolve. And the fact remains is, look, he has a certain single-mindedness, which is, of course, is what has brought him there. And he wants to get past 20 slams, which is what Federer and Nadal are stuck on. And I think he'll do anything to get there. And of course, he lost the US Open final. So if you're looking from pure tennis perspective, he wants to get back to his winning ways. So if there's anybody who could go through this and be allowed to play and win it, I would say that's Djokovic.
Right. So you talked about, this narrative that he has, this him against the world narrative. As this drags on, what is the impact that it will have on Djokovic's image as one of the greatest players in tennis, as one of the leaders of the sport?
So great player, I think that won't change. I mean, you're a great player, the record says that. But I think that in this particular time, he's been a little tone deaf, especially to Melburnians. So I think you're talking about a city which has been the most locked down city in the world last year. I have family there. People are tired and they're angry and they're frustrated. But they followed the rules. They've done what is necessary. They've got vaccinated. So I think for them, ordinary people, this extraordinary player asking for exemptions and favors has just not gone down well. I mean, I can't remember the last time there has been such public anger against a visiting athlete. I tell you, I really can't remember. And of course, I think in Australia, they have made a mess out of it. And in some ways turned Djokovic into a victim because I think there's politics involved and there's so much confusion. People don't know what's going on. And now I think people in some ways think that, the system is being unfair to him. But I think the public anger against him is very strong and it will stay. And if he plays, I'm not a great fan of booing. I don't like it at all, but I suspect that he's going to have a hard time.
Right. Well, that's, of course, at the Australian Open. But Djokovic's vaccine exemption, essentially, it points to him not being vaccinated. And what are the implications of that, considering his future participation in tournaments for the rest of the year?
So I think other tournaments are going to, follow suit. A lot of tournaments where, you have to be vaccinated to play, which I think is only fair. If you're going to ask all the spectators to be vaccinated before they come to watch, then I think it's only fair you do the same with players. And I think that one is players themselves are going to get tired answering questions about Djokovic, because I think now in Australia, everybody goes to a press conference. The first thing they get asked is not backhands or forehands, but what do you think about Djokovic's situation? And they themselves are vaccinated. And they like Djokovic, but I think they're going to get tired of, answering these questions. But I think that, if this goes on, I mean, if he went to Paris and they had a vaccine mandate, and again, he was asking exemptions, I think it would almost be unseemly. Unless he has a really, really, really good reason to be exempt. But the problem, I think, in this whole saga is everything is ambiguous. We don't know what the reason is. Why is he asking for an exemption? So the discussion's not moving on to a more nuanced level. It's just still this mystery to it, and I don't think that helps Djokovic at all.
Well, Rohit, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Rohit Brijnath, Assistant Sports Editor. He'll be in Melbourne covering the second week of the Australian Open, so keep an eye out for his analysis. After some uncertainty over why Djokovic was barred from entering Australia, it's now emerging, at least from the Australian government's perspective, that he didn't meet the stricter COVID-19 vaccine requirements for foreign nationals coming into the country. While it's not confirmed that Djokovic used a previous COVID-19 infection as his reason for not being double vaccinated, if he did base his exemption on those grounds, it would have been enough to get him an exemption to play at the Australian Open, but not enough to get into the country. That requires a non-Australian to produce a negative PCR test and complete vaccination or medical proof that he cannot be vaccinated.